The notorious alpha of the Black Wolf pack, Kellen Blackwood, is feared throughout the entire pack for his violent temper. Yet everyone knows he adores his mate, Lilith Hayes. I am only an Omega, the lowest rank among werewolves, and I haven't awakened my wolf by the age of 18. Even though I became a laughingstock in the Black Wolf pack, Kellen still treats me as the love of his life. He always says I am as pure as moonlight, and he's willing to bow his head and surrender his pride for me. I believe him. Despite my family's objections, I become his mate. For 5 years, we have been together. He cherishes me like a priceless treasure. The Alpha Kellen, who shows no mercy outside, cooks meals for me and takes care of our home with his own hands. The fearsome leader, who never bows to anyone, gently lowers his head and shows deference to me. When my brother, Rex Hayes, breaks werewolf law, Kellen is the one who accompanies me to find someone who will testify for him. But on the day of the trial, the only person who can prove Rex's innocence, Ella Foster, is nowhere to be found. Rex is convicted of assault instead of being cleared for self-defense. The moment Rex is found guilty, Kellen is the first to stand and applaud in agreement. I lose control and run to confront Ella, demanding to know why she turned her back on us at the last moment. Ella clutches her stomach, tears rolling down her face, her voice trembling as she says, "Rex really is at fault. I can't just stand by and let my father be blamed for something he didn't do." I stand there in shock, and then Kellen appears behind me. "Lilith, Ella is pregnant with my pup. I can't let anything happen to the pup she's carrying. Rex's punishment is exile to the frozen wastes. Compared to everything Ella has lost, that's already merciful." Chapter 1. The notorious alpha of the Black Wolf pack, Kellen Blackwood, had doted on me for 5 years. But in the end he sided with his lover, Ella Foster, who was carrying his child, and let my brother, Rex Hayes, be sentenced to exile in the frozen wastes. During the trial, Kellen even applauded the verdict. He said that exile was already a mercy. It was only when I saw Ella's pregnant belly that I realized the love I had believed in for 5 years had been a lie. Rex is just being exiled to the frozen wastes. It's not the end of the world. Stop making such a fuss. Kellen snapped. I never thought I'd hear those words come out of Kellen's mouth. Just last night, he had held me in his arms and softly promised me that the Black Wolf pack would always be just and fair. But now he was personally sending Rex to his doom. I turned around, staggering, and grabbed his arm with all my strength. My voice came out dry and rough. "Why, Kellen? Why are you doing this?" He pulled my hand off his arm, his gaze cold and distant. "I told you. Rex killed someone. He has to pay the price." Anxiously I said, "But you know it was self-defense. If he hadn't fought back, the one who died would have been." "That's not important, Lilith. I promised Ella I would protect her. She's pregnant with my pup. She can't be upset." I lifted my head and stared hard at Kellen's indifferent expression. "So, you're saying Rex's life just doesn't matter? Ella can't be upset because she's having your pup, but what about me? What about Rex? What about all the unfairness we've had to endure? Who is supposed to pay for that?" I demanded. Kellen frowned. "You don't need to worry. You're my mate, Lilith. No one in the Black Wolf pack would dare say a word against you. When Rex comes back from the frozen wastes, I'll make sure he spends the rest of his life safe here." I let out a bitter laugh as tears began to fall. "So, we have to just obey you and live however you want us to, is that it?" A look of irritation crossed Kellen's face. "Lilith, you need to learn your place. This matter is over." I needed to learn my place? I pulled my hand away, contempt and bitterness churning in my chest. What if I refuse? His gaze grew darker, and his expression turned cold as a frozen lake. "You should understand that the verdict will be the same without Ella's testimony, no matter how many times you appeal." Besides, he leaned in close. His breath fanned against my ear, but his gaze drifted over my shoulder. "Lilith, you wouldn't want someone else to suffer because of you, would you?" "Kellen, you're so cruel." I cried. All my emotions turned into bitter disappointment and stuck in my throat. I dropped my shoulders and walked toward the door, feeling like every step weighed a ton. At the doorway, Ella stood wrapped in Kellen's cloak, her gaze cold and full of malice as she looked at me. "You're leaving? You're the sister of a murderer. Shouldn't you kneel before the moon goddess statue and confess Rex's crime in front of the entire Black Wolf pack? I gave a cold laugh. A murderer? If Rex hadn't been there, your father would have torn that Omega apart. And you knew I was Kellen's mate. Before I could finish, Kellen suddenly clamped his hand over my mouth from behind. Lilith, Ella's right. Someone in your family has to apologize and atone. If you won't do it, then your mother will. I turned my head to look at him. I truly couldn't understand how the man who once swore to protect me could become so heartless. Chapter 2. I was the lowest ranking Omega in the Black Wolf pack. 5 years ago, while I was out gathering herbs in the Black Forest, I stumbled upon a gravely wounded Kellen. That day, he had been ambushed by a rival pack. More than 30 werewolves had surrounded him. Anyone else would have surrendered or been torn apart. But Kellen was no ordinary werewolf. He fought them all off alone, defeating every last one. When it was over, blood poured from gashes in his shoulder and abdomen. He leaned back against a tree, calmly wiping the blood from his arm with his shirt. When he looked up, the moonlight happened to fall right across my silhouette. Later, Kellen told me that was the moment I lit up his world and carved a place in his heart. He said I looked like a firefly in the woods, or a morning star shining in the snow. In the beginning, I was afraid of him and found every excuse to avoid him. I'd say things like, I only like gentle and steady werewolves. You're too fierce. So he forced himself to rein in his temper, and even sought advice from the older werewolves in the pack about how to control his emotions. I told him I hated the endless fighting between packs and only wanted a quiet, peaceful life. So he disbanded his private guards, sealed up the armory, and focused on running the hunting grounds and farmland with the rest of the Black Wolf pack. I was self-conscious because I hadn't awakened my wolf by the age of 18. I said I wasn't worthy of him. So he took me to the moon goddess statue and swore that he would only ever love me in front of the whole Black Wolf pack. Everyone said Kellen spoiled me rotten. If anyone so much as looked at me the wrong way, he'd lose his temper and unleash his alpha energy. Yet in the end, Kellen betrayed me. While I was kept in the dark, he took Ella as his lover, and even got her pregnant. Since I hadn't awakened my wolf, I couldn't sense his betrayal at all. It was pathetic, almost laughable. Now, for Ella's sake, Kellen had Rex take the blame for murder, and was forcing me to kneel before the moon goddess statue, confessing in front of the entire pack. The guards dragged me roughly to Moon Plaza, and threw me into the middle of the crowd. Ella's relatives saw me and immediately surrounded me in fury. Kellen only frowned slightly, but he said nothing to stop them. Ella raised her chin and looked at him. Her brother killed my father. Isn't it normal for my family to vent a little? Alpha Kellen, you're not really going to protect a murderer's sister, are you? Kellen stayed silent, and he didn't intervene. I stood surrounded by Ella's relatives. They tore at my dress, kicked my knees, and yanked my hair, smashing my head against the stone statue. Some even whipped my back with thorn vines. Pain racked my whole body, and I screamed Kellen's name. Kellen, no matter what, I'm still your mate. Kellen looked like he was about to intervene, but Ella quickly stepped in, acting like the voice of reason. That's enough. Stop. Kellen brought her here today so she could apologize for my father's sake. The crowd gradually backed away, revealing me, who was now covered in bruises and blood. Ella's eyes were filled with contempt as she pointed at the altar below the moon goddess statue. Lilith, I want you to stand before the moon goddess statue and admit that you're the sister of a murderer. Apologize to my father's spirit in front of everyone here. My fingers clenched the shredded edge of my dress. My voice trembled with pain, but I forced it to stay cold. Keep dreaming. I will never admit my brother is a murderer. Kellen's tall figure appeared at my side. Do as she says, or I'll have no choice but to bring your mother here instead. My fingernails dug into my palm as I looked at him, my gaze burning. Kellen, why do you have to do this to me? He looked down at me and said coldly, it's just a few words. It's not that hard. Ella wants to hear them, so just say it. If you insist on being stubborn, I have my ways of making you listen. You know that better than anyone. I'd forgotten he was the alpha of the Black Wolf pack. Even if I didn't want to obey, he had plenty of ways to make me submit. He could use my family to threaten me, or the pack's laws to corner me. I could endure anything if it were just me, but if he ever turned those threats on my mother, I didn't dare imagine it. Hopeless. I closed my eyes and wrestled with myself for a long time. In the end, I opened my bleeding hand and bowed my head to him. Fine. I'll do it. While dragging my injured leg, I walked to the altar, faced the moon goddess statue, and choked out every word. I am the sister of a murderer. I apologize here to Ella's father, Miles Foster. I'm sorry. However, Ella showed no sign of satisfaction. Lilith, a true confession requires you to cut your palm. Blood is the only proof of sincerity. Don't you know? And your voice is far too soft. Humiliation and despair washed over me like an icy river. I trembled as I bit down hard on my lips, grabbed the stone knife from the altar, and slashed open my palm. Blood rushed out, and I lifted my bleeding hand, forcing myself to speak loudly. I am the sister of a murderer. I apologize here to Ella's father, Miles Foster. I'm sorry. My blood dripped between my fingers and splattered across the stone slab. Kellen's gaze darkened almost imperceptibly. I looked up and locked eyes with Ella. Is that enough? My wound seemed to shock the rest of the pack. Someone reached out to pull Ella away. Ella curled her lip in disdain. I suppose that's sincere enough. I clutched my bleeding hand and backed away from the altar, barely able to stand. Kellen reached out to steady me, but I slapped his hand away. Don't touch me. Wherever you've touched is filthy. Rage flashed in Kellen's eyes. He seized my wrist, his gaze sharp and dangerous. What did you say? Say it again. I met his glare and repeated myself. My eyes were cold and hollow, and every last trace of affection for him was already gone. The moment the words left my mouth, Kellen acted like I'd stabbed him, and he released me at once. This time, I didn't spare him another glance. I pressed my bloody hand to my side, and walked out of Moon Plaza without looking back. Chapter 3. I never imagined everything that happened at Moon Plaza would spread through the Black Wolf pack overnight. Twisted and exaggerated at every turn. By the bonfire, near the animal pens, and even out in the fields, I heard the other werewolves whispering about it everywhere I went. Some said Rex had never acted in self-defense at all, and that he had always hated Miles and struck out on purpose. Others guessed that since I'd used my blood to confess, there had to have been some hidden grudge between Rex and Miles. Why else would things have gotten so out of hand? My mother, Dorothy Anderson, overheard these rumors while out picking wild berries. She was so upset that she nearly collapsed in the grass right there. Even when we hid inside our stone house, covering our ears and closing our eyes, those malicious whispers always found a way in. After Mom woke up, she kept frowning with worry etched all over her face. If Rex hears those things out in the frozen wastes, how will he ever get through it? I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight, and I couldn't find the words to defend myself or Rex. But the next day, word still reached Rex. The news came from one of the patrols in the frozen wastes. Rex used a shard of ice to cut his throat out there in the endless cold. When we got the news, Mom and I ran to the edge of the frozen wastes like we'd lost our minds. By the time we arrived, Rex's blood had already stained the snow deep red. I was shaking all over. Why didn't you call for a healer to help him? The werewolf guarding the wastes looked away in shame. I heard Ella's pregnancy isn't stable. Alpha Kellen summoned every last healer in the pack to treat her. He said no one else mattered until Ella's pup was safe. A cold wave crashed through my heart. The whole Black Wolf pack. Ella couldn't possibly need that many. This is too much. No one answered. Another guard sighed. Maybe you should try something else. The werewolf who was putting pressure on Rex's wound just shook his head. He's lost too much blood. He can't hold on much longer. My breath caught sharply, and then I spun around to run for the Black Wolf pack. I'm going to Kellen. I'll beg him to send a healer to help Rex. But as soon as I took a step, Rex grabbed my wrist. His grip was tight, but his breaths were getting weaker and weaker. I quickly turned back and held his hand. Don't get worked up. I'll save you, I promise. Just trust me, okay? Rex slowly opened his eyes, his gaze cloudy as he struggled to look at me. He managed to lift his hand, brushing my cheek with what little strength he had left. His lips moved like he had so much to say. A werewolf pulled his blanket aside just a bit. He doesn't have much time. Say what you need to. My vision blurred, and my ears were ringing. I could barely hear anything at all. The other werewolves quietly stepped back, giving us a moment of privacy. Mom, pale as a ghost, leaned in close, tears barely held at bay. Rex, what is it? I'm listening. His voice was so faint. The wind nearly carried it away, but every word landed like a stone in my chest. Lilith, don't go begging Kellen for me. I just want you and Mom to be okay. Nothing is more important than that. Mom, just like we talked about, take Lilith and leave the Black Wolf pack. Yes, I know, Mom sobbed, clutching his hand as her tears fell. Then I can go in peace. Rex's voice faded until the last words were barely a whisper, swept away by the cold wind. His hand slipped from my cheek, slowly losing all strength. On instinct, I grabbed his hand and clutched it in both of mine, as if holding on tight enough could keep him from slipping away forever. Grief swallowed Mom and me, cutting through us like the winter wind. I had no idea how much time passed before Mom finally took a shaky breath. She gripped my hand, her voice trembling but full of resolve as she said, Lilith, let's bring Rex home. Chapter 4. The kind guards escorted us safely to the edge of Black Wolf Pack territory. I helped Mom wrap Rex's body carefully with clean animal hide, and together we carried him back to our stone house. Once inside, Mom went to the old cabinet by her bed and pulled out a wolf fang pendant carved with a crescent moon, a keepsake she'd hidden for years. She stitched a leather envelope from another piece of hide, placed the pendant inside, and handed it to me. Lilith, asked one of the older werewolves going out to hunt in Moon Forest to deliver this to Bray Wagner, the alpha of the Silver Moon Pack. I clutched that heavy bundle of leather in my hands, as I felt my chest burn with hatred. The look in Rex's eyes before he died had told me he'd been driven to the edge, with nowhere left to go. Was I really going to just walk away from it all? But when I looked at Mom's trembling hands and tear-streaked face, I quietly sealed the leather pouch. I found an older werewolf who was just about to leave for a hunt. I handed him the package with both hands, and pressed my last piece of dried venison into his palm as payment. He patted his chest and promised he'd deliver it to Bray personally. After he left, Mom and I spent the entire night at Rex's side. At dawn, we carried Rex's body to the hills behind our house to choose a burial cave. We'd planned to lay him to rest beside my father. But whether by chance or on purpose, the cave next to my father's was now marked as Miles' new grave. I took a deep breath. Mom, let's pick a different spot and move Dad's remains too. Mom also saw Miles' name on the new grave. She nodded and turned to follow me toward the werewolf who managed the burial grounds. We'd just taken a few steps when Kellen appeared at the end of the stone path, supporting Ella as they approached. Ella's expression changed the instant she saw what we carried. Lilith, what do you think you're doing? My father was just buried. Are you really going to disturb his spirit so soon? Before I could answer, she shrieked for Kellen. Look, they're doing it on purpose. They won't even let my father rest in peace. Kellen's expression darkened suddenly. Before I could react, he drew the bone knife from his belt and swung it down, hacking at Rex's body. I moved on instinct to protect the body, but I wasn't fast enough. The knife cut through hide and flesh, splitting Rex's body in two. The animal hide tore open, and his upper half thudded to the ground. His head rolled right off the cliff, disappearing into the chasm below. I stared in disbelief, feeling my rage boil over. Kellen, do you even know whose body you just destroyed? He leaned down and said indifferently, Why should I care? All I know is that you've messed with the wrong people. Without another word, he hurled the animal hide at my face. I stood there numbly as pain and shock crawled across my skin. Lilith! Mom rushed to me, but didn't dare touch the spot where the hide had struck me. She sobbed and screamed at Kellen. You heartless jerk! What did our family ever do to you to deserve this? How could you treat Lilith and Rex this way? I wrapped my shaking arms around her, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom, forget it. I was foolish to believe promises that should never have been trusted, and to fall for a man I never should have loved. Kellen finally looked up at me, meeting my eyes this time. However, I wouldn't even spare him a glance. I patted Mom's back, then kneeled down to gather the scattered remains of Rex. Warm tears dripped down my cheeks, blending with the dirt beneath me. Kellen just stood there in silence. Even when Ella tugged on his sleeve, he didn't seem to notice. As dusk fell and the mountain wind howled, Mom and I finally gathered every last piece of Rex and wrapped him in the animal hide just before the blizzard rolled in. When we were about to leave, Kellen stepped in front of us, blocking the path. Lilith, whose body is this? Tell me. This time, whatever you say, I'll believe you. I forced a crooked smile. Kellen, it doesn't matter anymore. Just like you said, why should you care? From this day on, my life has nothing to do with you. I pushed past him, guiding Mom away from the mountain without looking back. When we returned to our stone house, 2 tall, unfamiliar werewolves were waiting at the door. I knew the Silvermoon Pack had sent their people for us. Before leaving, I stopped by the witch's house and requested a moon pact. When I cut my palm and let the blood drip onto the contract, I finally felt a bit of relief. By sunrise, the moon pact was in effect. Kellen and I were no longer bonded as mates. After I left, Kellen stood by the cliff for a long time. He didn't understand what was wrong with him. He thought he'd long since lost all feelings for me, but when he heard me say I'd loved the wrong person, it felt like an icicle had pierced his chest and stole his breath away. He tried to stop me, perhaps because he just wanted to hold on to something. But the woman who once looked at him with affection now stared at him with a chilling indifference, not letting even a trace of warmth through. Panic grew inside him like wild vines, and his hands trembled with pain. Ella grabbed his arm, but for the first time, her touch made his skin crawl. He yanked his arm away, ordered the guards to escort her home, and wandered deeper into the packlands alone. Inside the stone house I used to share with him, every rock wall was marked with traces of our past. My charcoal sketches of him, the bone wind chimes he made, the mushrooms I had dried and stacked in the corner. He climbed the stone steps to the upper floor, pried open a hidden compartment in the wall, and pulled out a moonstone pendant with our names engraved on it. While tracing the words engraved on it, he thought to himself, she's still my mate. She can't really be gone. All these tantrums are nothing. Sooner or later, she'll come back to me. I shouldn't feel this anxious. But when he tried to sleep, all he saw behind closed eyes was me, with blood streaming down my forehead as I gathered Rex's remains. When he opened his eyes, all he saw was the cold, empty ceiling. Restless, he kicked over the bedside table and gulped down half a jug of liquor. He finally collapsed onto the bed, clutching the moonstone to his chest as he drifted into a heavy sleep. He woke the next day to a searing pain in his chest, and he rolled on the floor in agony. He could feel something slowly tearing itself from his body. All at once, he sat up, panic in his eyes for the first time in his life. He couldn't sense me anymore. Chapter 5. This couldn't be happening. I was his mate. How could he suddenly lose all sense of me? There was only one explanation. Kellen looked down and saw that the moonstone pendant had split in half. A jolt of dread ran through him. He threw aside the blanket and searched the house frantically, checking every corner. Finally, under the bed, his fingers found the other half of the moonstone. The edges were jagged and cracked beyond repair. There was no putting it back together. Ella came in carrying a plate of roasted meat. She froze when she saw him clutching his chest with a pale face as his eyes locked on the broken pendant in his hand. A shadow of malice flickered in Ella's eyes, but her voice stayed gentle. It looks like it's broken for good. Why not just carve a new one with Lilith? If this had happened before, Kellen would have tossed the stone into the fire and grabbed her chin, teasing, "Forget it. I only want your name carved into my pendant." But now he just kept staring at the broken piece, lost in thought. He didn't even glance at her. "Kellen." Ella called out. He'd been acting strange ever since yesterday at the cliff, and the unease gnawed at Ella's heart. She reached out to touch his hand, but he suddenly stood and strode for the door. "I'm going out. Eat without me." At the doorway he paused and added, "After you're done, have the guards escort you home." Ella was shaking with rage. Since when did Kellen ever ignore her like this? It had to be because of Lilith. Even after leaving, she still managed to disrupt their peaceful life. Consumed by anger, She grabbed the stone axe and hacked at the bundle of herbs Lilith had hung on the wall. Kellen had no idea the house was now a wreck. He hurried toward my home with his heart pounding and fear clawing at his insides. He needed to see me now. He knocked on her door for a long time, but only the wind replied. Next door, a she-wolf opened her door. When she saw Kellen, she immediately lowered her head and pressed her right hand over her left chest in a salute. Alpha Kellen, are you looking for Lilith? She asked in a trembling voice, full of respect. Kellen nodded numbly, his gaze cold. She shrank beneath his stare, but she still managed to reply. Lilith, she left with her mother yesterday. When he heard that, Kellen's breath caught in his throat, and he gripped the broken moonstone even tighter. They left? Where did they go? She tensed, hanging her head even further. I don't know. I only heard them say they were going far away. They said they'd never come back to the Black Wolf pack. She risked a glance at his darkening expression and added, they left in a hurry, like they'd planned it for a while. Even the guards you posted didn't notice, Kellen asked coldly. When did they leave? It was right after you were at the cliff yesterday, she mumbled, almost burying her face in her chest, hardly daring to breathe. Kellen stood there as the wind and snow whipped against his face, but he didn't feel a thing. So, I had really left. I really meant it when I said my life had nothing to do with him anymore. The she-wolf, terrified he'd turn his anger on her, inched away. Kellen snapped back to reality and immediately called for his beta, Bradley Norman. Find out what happened to Rex in the frozen wastes. Track where Lilith and Dorothy have gone, he ordered. Bradley went to investigate right away. Kellen wiped his face, then hurried toward the center of the pack. 10 minutes later, Bradley returned to report. Alpha Kellen, Rex, he ended his own life in the frozen wastes yesterday. As for Lilith and Dorothy, we can't find them. We only know the Silvermoon Pack's migration team passed through our border last night. The guards said they saw 2 figures join the group. Kellen froze, nearly losing his balance. Rex ended his own life? Why would he do that? He asked coldly through gritted teeth. We're not sure, just heard that Ella visited the frozen wastes the day before. Yeah? Kellen's eyes narrowed dangerously, and his knuckles whitened as he clenched his fists. When he saw Kellen remain silent, Bradley hesitated. He then stepped forward to speak, only to be blasted back by Kellen's roar. Get out! Bradley scrambled back, not daring to meet Kellen's furious, dangerous gaze. Kellen took a long drink of hard liquor from the flask at his belt. The burn in his throat did nothing to quiet the turmoil in his chest. He hurled the empty flask to the ground and stormed back to the stone house. When he opened the door, chaos met his eyes. The moon totem he'd drawn with me was in shreds. The straw mat I had woven had been stomped to pieces. Herbs I'd dried lay scattered across the floor. Even the moonstone necklace he'd given me was broken in the ashes by the hearth. Ella sat in the mess, her eyes red and brimming with tears. Once, the sight of her like this would have turned his anger to helplessness. She had always reminded him of a younger me, stubborn and prone to tantrums. But now Ella was just an eyesore. No matter how angry I ever got, I would never destroy anything, nor did I ever hide behind fake innocence. Kellen stepped through the wreckage and squatted down in front of her. Ella's eyes flickered with hope, thinking he'd wipe her tears the way he always had. However, his hand closed tightly around her throat. Who told you to touch her things? Where did you get the nerve to break her things? Kellen sneered. His grip tightened, and his voice turned low and lethal. He pressed Ella's face into the shards of the bone basket she'd smashed. The bone fragments cut her cheek, drawing blood. Ella clawed at his arm, sobbing, Kellen! Let go, it hurts. But the Kellen who once cared for her was gone. His eyes were bloodshot, and his grip only grew tighter, as if he were channeling all his fury into that one hand. When she saw this dangerous, ruthless side of Kellen for the first time, Ella trembled in fear and whimpered. It wasn't me, I didn't want to break anything. Lilith said she didn't want them anymore. She left everything for you. She said she didn't want any of it. Kellen's hand loosened abruptly. What did you just say? Lilith came back. She told you herself she didn't want any of this? What exactly did she say she didn't want? Speak clearly. If you lie to me, I'll exile you to the frozen wastes. Ella clutched her neck, coughing violently. She braced herself on the ground, backing away as bone shards dug into her palms, but she didn't dare make a sound. Yes, she came back last night. She said she doesn't want anything anymore. She doesn't want you or anything that has to do with you. He scoffed. I'm giving you a chance, not to hear you lie. Chapter 6. Kellen really had blamed Ella unfairly this time. She hadn't lied. Before I left, I entrusted Mom to the guards from the Silver Moon Pack who had come to help us. Then I returned alone to the stone house in the Black Wolf Pack one last time. When I pushed open the door, the stone house was eerily quiet. I thought Kellen wasn't home, so I turned and walked toward his study. I lit the pine oil lamp and began searching his stone cabinets, digging out the scrolls that mapped out the pack's mineral deposits and all the private transaction records he'd made with other packs. I stuffed everything into a leather satchel. Once I finished, I headed into the bedroom. I hesitated when I saw someone lying on the bed. Kellen was usually so alert. No matter how exhausted he was, he'd always sense someone approaching. But now, the air in the room was thick with the smell of alcohol. I took a couple of steps forward and accidentally kicked an empty wineskin. My body pitched forward, and my forehead smacked hard into Kellen's arm. He was truly out cold, and he was so drunk that he didn't even stir. As I picked myself up, moonlight spilled across the room, and I saw what was on his chest, the moonstone pendant with both our names carved into it. I reached out and slid the pendant out from under his hand. Under the moonlight, the lines spelling Lilith stood out stark and clear. Once, I had thought this was the strongest bond between us. Now looking at it, all I felt was bitter irony, mocking me for ever believing that his calculated choices were genuine love. I snapped off the half of the pendant bearing my own name, rolled it between my fingers, and thought about tossing it in the fire pit. In the end, I was afraid he'd wake up and notice, so after a long moment of hesitation, I simply left both pieces of the broken pendant on the bed. I opened the hidden compartment beneath the stone bed, and took out my identification paper, the silver jewelry my mother had given me, and my father's herbal guidebook. Then, without looking back, I walked out of the stone house. I thought everything was going smoothly, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Just as I crossed the pack's defensive boundary, someone clamped a rough burlap sack over my mouth and dragged me onto a sled. It wasn't until I was hauled onto the sled that I saw 4 burly huntsmen who had once served under Kellen. Never in my life had I imagined they'd end up working for Ella. "What are you doing, Ella?" I shouted. I was pinned flat against the wooden planks of the sled. When I tried to struggle, one of the huntsmen pressed down hard on my shoulder. Ella sat across from me, perched on a pile of furs. Her gaze was dark and cold as she stared me down. "What do you think I'm doing? I want you gone for good. You're such a shameless bitch, Lilith. After everything Kellen did to you, you should have left the Black Wolf Pack long ago. But you just wouldn't go, would you? You even snuck back in the middle of the night, trying to seduce him. Do you really think I'm blind?" When I saw her face twisted by jealousy, I forced myself to stay calm, swallowing my anger for the sake of survival. "You're wrong. I only came back to pick up a few things. Kellen's the one who exiled Rex and forced me to confess with my blood. He even had Rex's body cut up. After everything he's done to me, there's no way I could ever forgive him. I was planning to leave anyway. If you hadn't stopped me, my mother and I would already be on our way to the Silver Moon Pack." "Is that so?" Ella's expression softened a little, though suspicion lingered in her eyes. I let out a sigh. "Ella, you have nothing to worry about. I'm not going to fight you. I don't want Kellen, or the Black Wolf Pack, or anything to do with any of it. There's no need for you to break the Pack's rules over something like this." Ella let out a sharp laugh. "Lilith, you really are naive. Let me tell you the truth. Kellen's affection is the least of what I want." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing a patchwork of scars along her arm. "Take a good look. Do you really think everyone gets to be cherished by their pack the way you did? You have no idea what it was like for me in the Grey Wolf Pack. She-wolves were nothing more than throwaway prey. My parents nearly traded me to the frozen waste to be food, just to get more supplies for my brother. If your brother hadn't killed my bastard father, I'd be long dead in an ice hole, never even having a chance to meet Kellen. What I want has never just been Kellen himself. I want his power, the pack's minds, and the kind of strength that means I'll never be bullied again. Chapter 7. I never would have guessed Ella had suffered that much. But at the same time, I was more confused than ever. If Rex helped you, why did you let him be exiled? I asked. Ella scoffed. Of course I did it to break you and Kellen up. If I didn't stir things up between you, how could I ever hope to become his mate? Her words hit me like a slap, sending a chill straight through my spine. So, you spread those rumors through the pack just to drive Rex to his death, and to make sure there'd always be a blood debt between Kellen and me, so we could never go back to the way things were? A trace of approval flickered in Ella's eyes. You're not as dumb as I thought. But really that's only what I wanted you to think. No matter how fast gossip spreads in the pack, news from the frozen wastes always travels slower. So I went there myself. I told your brother that everyone in the pack shunned you because of him. I said as long as he was alive, he'd only drag you down. If he died, you'd finally be free. It turns out he really did care about you. Just one night later it was no wonder Rex said those things before he died. Tears streamed down my face, and the hatred in my chest threatened to consume me. I glared at her, my voice shaking with rage. Ella, I swear I'll kill you. Ella just leaned back against the sled, completely unfazed. You'll be disappointed. Tonight you won't kill me. You'll die by my hand. My goal was already achieved. I didn't have to kill you, but you made Kellen start to pull away from me. After what happened by the cliff yesterday, he's been colder. He won't even let me stay in the stone house. So Lilith, I have no choice. I can't let you live. I said nothing more, feeling my mind race for any possible way out as the sled sped across the endless stretch of white. The sled veered farther off the path, heading deep into the no man's ice valley. I made up my mind. As we passed over an ice bridge, I suddenly knocked the huntsman next to me aside and grabbed Ella by the hair. The others rushed to pull me off her, but they were afraid of hurting her, so they only punched my back again and again. No matter how much it hurt, I refused to let go. At last Ella shrieked. Stop the sled and get her away from me. What are you standing there for? The sled came to an abrupt halt. I seized the chance and yanked Ella toward the door. One of the huntsmen tried to shield her, but he ended up tumbling with us out onto the snow. I scrambled over them and vaulted the railing of the ice bridge, landing at the edge of a steep cliff. Below, a raging river churned between jagged ice. It must have been a good 30 feet down, but I had nowhere left to run. I looked back at the huntsmen closing in, then steeled myself and jumped. At that moment, I was deeply grateful they hadn't had time to tie up my hands and feet in the chaos. As I plummeted, I heard the sharp crack of ice breaking around me. For a moment, I thought I'd die there. But then, a powerful current swept me aside, and a drifting sheet of ice slid up beside me, shielding me. Ella and her huntsman peered over the edge, probably assuming I'd been impaled on the ice or swept away for good. No one could possibly survive jumping from such a height into such a powerful current. It didn't take long for them to drive the sled away. As I clung to the chunk of ice, I struggled desperately for the far bank. The cold made every wound scream, and my head swam with dizziness. Just as my strength finally gave out, a raft drifted toward me. Someone reached down and pulled me up. I was stunned when I saw Hector Spencer, the chief guard from the Silvermoon pack. He was supposed to escort Mom to safety. I told you to take my mother and get out of here. Why did you come back? I asked. He shook his head helplessly. You and your mom are a handful, you know that? You told me to take her, but she wouldn't get on the boat unless she saw you. There was nothing I could do. I knew I'd acted rashly. After all the help he'd given, I couldn't bring myself to be harsh. I murmured, I'm sorry. He waved it off and lifted me onto a sled by the riverbank, wrapping me tightly in thick furs. Chapter 8. We hadn't left the Black Wolf Pack's territory. Hector took me to a hidden camp deep in the mountains, where Mom was also staying. As soon as I stepped inside the tent, I saw Mom wiping away tears, sitting on a fur mat. Next to her stood an older werewolf in silver-patterned armor, his face contorted with anger as he struck the ground hard with his stone staff. Hector and I exchanged a look, then hurried inside. Mom, I said. Mr. Lucas Reynard, Hector greeted the old werewolf respectfully. Mom went pale the moment she saw me, soaked and covered in ice. What happened to you? As I didn't want to tell her the truth, I held her hand to comfort her. I'm fine really. I just slipped crossing the river, and ended up drenched. Hector glanced at me but didn't expose my lie. Instead he turned to Lucas and asked quietly, Mr. Reynard, why are you here? Lucas shot him a glare. You've got a lot of nerve asking me that. The Silvermoon Pack's allies are suffering in the Black Wolf Pack, and you tried to keep it from me. His bad temper was infamous among packs. After snapping at Hector, Lucas brushed past him and stood in front of me. Lilith, Dorothy has told me everything that's happened to your family. Don't worry. I'll get justice for Rex. And you two aren't going anywhere. Go get cleaned up, change into some dry clothes, and settle in here at the camp. I glanced instinctively at Mom. She pulled me into the side tent, rummaged through her bundle for a clean fur coat, and explained, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I couldn't help but tell him everything about Rex. He got so worked up, he swore he'd stand up for us and make sure justice is served. When I saw her guilty expression, I patted her shoulder before taking the clothes and going to the warm tent to change. After getting dressed, I went straight to Hector and asked him directly about Lucas' identity. He told me Lucas was not only the younger brother of the Silvermoon Pack's Alpha, but also an elder of the Werewolf Council. His position was so powerful that even the slightest move from him could shake every pack. I must have looked stunned, because Hector couldn't help but laugh. If there's solid evidence in your brother's case, you can count on Mr. Reynard. He doesn't tolerate anything shady. He's as fair as they come. Hector's words encouraged me. The very next day before Lucas, I laid out the maps of mine deposits, trade records, and all the evidence I'd gathered. At first, I'd taken those things as leverage against Kellen. If he ever found out I'd stolen the records, I was ready to expose everything and take him down with me. I never expected they'd be used against Ella instead. After reading over everything, Lucas was so furious he nearly broke his staff in two. Unbelievable. They think they can drive someone to their death, and then silence the witnesses out in broad daylight. Hector carefully copied everything from the ledgers and spent 3 days searching for key evidence. However, no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't find anything decisive. Disappointed, we left the camp. But as we reached the mouth of the valley, we ran right into Kellen. He looked thinner, his eyes were sunken and weary, and his cloak was streaked with dust. His entire demeanor radiated defeat. But when he saw me, a glimmer of hope suddenly lit up in his tired eyes. Lilith, I knew you weren't dead. Chapter 9. After that day on the cliff, Kellen had started digging into the truth behind Rex's death. As he investigated, Ella's manipulations began to surface one after another. Everything that happened between Kellen and me was all because of her interference. In the end, she even forced me off the cliff. Only then did Kellen finally realize that the one he truly cared about was always me. Just as he had slowly forgotten the feelings he once had for me, he was now beginning to break free from every promise and lingering attachment to Ella. He captured Ella and the huntsman who'd helped her, taking brutal revenge against them. As the torture dragged on, Ella coughed up blood and hurled curses at him. You think this is all my fault? What about you? Wasn't it you who forced her to apologize for my father with her blood in front of the whole pack? Wasn't it you who destroyed Rex's body and hurt her? Do you want me to remind you how vicious you were when you swung that bone knife? Shut up. Kellen finally snapped, breaking her fingers one by one. After that, bloodied and desperate, he ordered every guard in the Black Wolf Pack to search the river for my body. He refused to believe I was dead. But no matter how hard they looked, they couldn't find a trace of me. For 3 whole days, he was trapped in the terror that I had died. Now seeing me alive and standing before him, his eyes lit up with hope. He rushed toward me, wanting to embrace me. I stepped back, shielded by Hector. Kellen froze, and his gaze hardened as he stared at Hector. Lilith, who is this? I met his eyes coldly. It's none of your business. He bristled. How can it be none of my business? Lilith, you're my mate. I cut him off. The Moon Pact is in effect now. Our bond is broken, Kellen. We're not mates anymore. For a moment, All the color drained from Kellen's face. Please, Lilith, don't do this. There are so many misunderstandings between us. I cut him off sharply. There's no misunderstanding. I know Ella lied to you about a lot, but the person who actually hurt me was you. It was always you. Kellen, don't try to play the victim now. I'll never forgive you or Ella. With that, I turned and left with Hector. Later, Kellen found the valley camp and kneeled outside the tent for so long that his knees bled, but he never got to see me again. Lucas ordered the guards to drag him away, only sending a single message. If you have anything to say, save it for the trial. Kellen understood immediately what it meant. Desperate to see me even once, he used all his influence to track down the family of the Omega whom Rex had once saved and brought them to the entrance of the camp. The whole Black Wolf pack was in an uproar. Everyone whispered about how their alpha was willing to face justice for the sake of winning his mate back. To me, it was all just absurd. Did Kellen really think this was love? Was it really love if he hurt the person he claimed to care for without restraint? A few days later, Hector brought in a Silvermoon Pack arbitrator to reopen Rex's case. After we submitted all the evidence, werewolf guards stormed into Kellen's stone house. Kellen had cut himself up with a bone knife, so his body was covered in blood. Beside him lay Ella, so bruised and battered that she was barely recognizable, and the 4 huntsmen, all with broken limbs. This time, Kellen didn't use his power to escape judgment. He stayed in the camp for half a month, confessing to every crime I'd accused him of. At the final trial, he didn't try to defend himself at all. He only looked at me, eyes burning bright as fire with a faint smile on his lips. The verdict was exactly what everyone expected. Kellen was sentenced to 6 years of exile in the frozen wastes for abusing his power and intentional harm. Ella was banished to the wild for 13 years for attempted murder and conspiracy. The 4 huntsmen each received 3 years of hard labor. As he was being led away, Kellen stared at me, his eyes full of tears. He pleaded, "Lilith, I've paid the price you wanted. Can you forgive me now?" I looked at him calmly and asked, "If I forgave you, could you bring Rex back?" Kellen's face turned ashen, and he let the guards drag him away without another word. Chapter 10. After we left the tribunal, Lucas clicked his tongue with a touch of wistfulness. Well, I guess I wasn't really needed this time. You young folk sure are something. One minute you're swearing lifelong loyalty, the next you're tearing each other apart. In the end, you just sort it all out on your own. I suppose that's what happens when life has been too easy for too long. Mom and I looked at each other and smiled through tears. At last, Rex's name had been cleared. Word spread quickly throughout the Black Wolf pack. Soon, many of those who had once joined in to accuse us quietly sent messages to apologize. They said Rex was a true warrior. He saved that Omega from being torn apart and shielded her from harm. Some of Rex's old friends even stood up for him, insisting he was an honest, passionate werewolf who always shared the best cuts of meat with the weaker members when they hunted. Ella's family couldn't go around in the Black Wolf pack anymore. Wherever they went, people cursed at them. Others kept throwing rotten animal guts at Miles' grave, while Ella and her mother lived in constant fear and unrest. Eventually, Ella's nerves became so frayed that one day she slipped and fell into a ravine, dying instantly. Mom and I knew nothing of this at the time. We gathered up my brother's and father's ashes and left the Black Wolf pack with Hector. On the road, Hector handed me a broken moonstone pendant and a heavy leather pouch. Kellen came to me before he was taken away. He sold off all his hidden valuables and put the money in this pouch. He said this was his promise to you. If he ever wronged you, everything he owned would be yours. I didn't refuse. I took the money, chose a sunlit valley in the Silvermoon Pack's territory, and built 2 stone cottages with Mom. We opened a small shop to trade pelts and sell medicinal herbs. I heard Kellen developed a mental illness in the frozen wastes. He refused to take the calming herbs the pack offered, and chose to lie awake every night until sunrise. Even when he managed to sleep, nightmares would jolt him awake. He drifted through each day in a daze, always clutching at his chest and muttering about the pain, repeating that he needed to see me. Black Wolf Pack's territory. When I heard news of him, I only smiled faintly. I would never see him again, not in this lifetime. We should just live the rest of our lives in our own worlds. I would keep moving forward, and he would remain trapped in the past. That was for the best, wasn't it?